Formed in the early to mid-70s in Swindon, Wiltshire in southwest England, XTC went through various name and lineup changes in their early years, but were primarily based around the songwriting partnership between Andy Partridge and Colin Moulding. Early stylistic touchstones included the pop of the ubiquitous Beatles and the Monkees, alongside more varied influences including glam rock, psychedelic rock, jazz fusion and avant-garde. Local guitar hero and depressive diabetic Dave Gregory was known and admired by Andy Partridge. However, due to Andy's newfound obsession with New York Dolls, Dave failed his then audition for the Helium Kids, as they were then known, on account of being too good for punk rock. The band enlisted drummer Terry Chambers and settled their original lineup with keyboardist Barry Andrews, signing to Richard Branson's Virgin Records on the recommendation of influential DJ John Peel, and releasing their first album, White Music, in 1978. While I can't say I rate this album particularly highly, it set out XTC's brand of agitated amphetamine rock and a 2/3 songwriting ratio between Andy and Colin Moulding in Andy's favour that set their creative dynamic going forward. Their second album, released in the same year, Go 2, offered basically more of the same, but saw the end of keyboardist Barry Andrews' association with the band on account of persistent and irreconcilable tensions between him and Andy. Following this, the band's classic lineup was formed after finally admitting Dave Gregory as the band's second guitarist, and Colin Moulding stepped out from Andy's songwriting shadow with Life Begins at the Hop, one of XTC's enduring early classic singles. He did one even better with Making Plans for Nigel, the lead single from their 1979 album Drums and Wires, a legendary slice of propulsive and angular new wave pop and social satire. And while not technically the highest charting single of their career, is absolutely the song they are most associated with to this day. And Nigel is as good an example of any XTC song of this era, really leaning into the two guitar thing between Andy and Dave.
And if young Nigel says he's happy, he must be happy, he must be happy, he must be happy in his world.
Really quite choppy and angular in its way. And not a hint of the kind of earning kind of stuff that they so derided as guitar players. The solo itself is also quite chunky as well. And relatively harmonically dissonant as well, as if the parts are pushing somewhat against each other. And that, taken with the mechanical clang of the drum part in the song, invokes the song's industrial subject matter, something you get time and time again with XTC. The music sounds like what it's about. Another notable example of this on the album is Colin's bass guitar part on Helicopter, which sounds like the thrum of a rotating propeller. So probably on account of Nigel being the first song on this album, on the original UK version of it at least, Drums and Wires is perhaps considered their best known record, and certainly the one where everything really came together for them for the first time, under the guidance of producer Steve Lillywhite. And that sound is energetic, quirky and dissonant, so much so that in certain moments it's hard to tell if the guitars are deliberately out of tune. The intro of When You're Near Me I Have Difficulty springs immediately to mind. But it nonetheless works because all this weirdo music for dorks is also very catchy and poppy. Not unlike the Talking Heads, a band you could perhaps consider XTC's American analogue. You'll notice the wordless high-pitched backing vocals that feature in almost all of their songs, perhaps an equivalent of today's millennial whoop or indie folk's hey-ho motif. Andy's Reel by Reel, the opening track on side 2, is my personal favourite on Drums and Wires due to the frankly insane amount of hooks in it. So the verse begins like this.
In the secret time, invading our privacy, on the way we mime, we play for the ministry.
It's quite straight ahead with this paranoid lyric about government surveillance, and then a key change into a circular ska influence bit.
They can feel you in bed, or when you take a bath. They can tape every cry, they can tape every laugh. They can turn you around, so you wonder what's real.
Into the first of the song's 2 choruses, that's 2 back-to-back choruses.
Real by real, busy little bees recording every unreal, but real.
Same again. And then into the second chorus.
Real, but real, but real, but oh, real, but real, but real, but oh.
Just an insane amount of hooks. And that's just the basic song. It then goes on to this completely separate bridge that bears almost no relation to the rest of it, an impossibly clever and non-bluesy guitar solo from Dave Gregory, and despite all that, is still over in less than 4 minutes. So for those in the band as well as outside of it, Drums and Wires is felt to be where XTC's career truly began. The commercial success of Colin's songs over Andy's also set them on a course that would eventually drive something of a wedge between them, especially considering Andy's obsessive-compulsive, some would say controlling nature. On the plus side, it did however mean that Andy's competitive instinct led him to steer the band in an even more poppy and direct direction for their next album. It also stands to reason that they would retain producer Steve Lillywhite for Black Sea, as well as record in the same facility, Townhouse Studios in London's Shepherd's Bush. And while I do think Black Sea has the better tunes on it and is all around more sonically cohesive and hard-hitting, I think it's fair to say that Drums and Wires and Black Sea could be reasonably considered like a Volume 1 and Volume 2, not unlike the Beatles' Rubber Soul and Revolver. They capture a distinct early chapter in the band's career, as well as being a product of the endless touring and recording cycle that they were now well locked into. That both made them an incredible band, but at the same time drove this version of XTC, at least, eventually straight into the ground. And I've characterised XTC as uncool or unrock and roll, perhaps quite unfairly, without really explaining that very much. But so much of the lifestyle differences for the groups of this era were more down to the aesthetics of punk and new wave as much as anything else. It's not like these guys were straight edges or anything. In fact, Andy's downward spiral, in contrast to the band's professional upward trajectory over the next couple of years, specifically relate to his addiction to Valium since first being prescribed the drug at age 12 to help manage his anxiety. And it's such a damn shame that the punishing nature of the industry could do this to people, and to my mind, it's a miracle that more groups caught in this particular treadmill and making almost no money out of it for themselves, I might add, didn't also implode one way or the other under this pressure. Younger people are, of course, naturally more resilient to constant travel, lack of sleep, and the general monotony of touring anyway. And while 45 years later we can be all sad about the what-ifs of XTC's career, it's ultimately the circumstances of this music that made it so explosive and powerful in the first place. So another positive way to look at it is that Andy's personal predicament went to precipitate a change of course for the band that indeed produced some, in fact, a lot of more incredible, imaginative music. And it delivered us this, perhaps their most exhilarating, steel-edged, young and hungry statement. Let's go. So Black Sea was released in September 1980 to critical acclaim, reaching a respectable 16 on the UK albums chart and was the band's best seller in the USA ever, peaking at number 41. The album sleeve depicts the band in antique diving suits with the letters X, T and C spelt here by a bird, a ship's mast and a half moon. As ever, they toured relentlessly in support of the album all over the world, and while the modest success of both Drums and Wires and Black Sea saw them graduate to an arena-level act, the strain of touring on Andy Partridge was really starting to show. He was suffering from major stress-related memory lapses and long-term withdrawal effects, having broken off his Valium dependency at the insistence of his wife. In a vain attempt to recalibrate XTC as an albums band rather than a live one, and in Andy's mind justify a less intense touring schedule, the next batch of songs that went on to make up 1982's monster double album, English Settlement, drew from an ever-widening stylistic palette, particularly in the use of acoustic instruments and Colin's newfound preference for the rubbery sound of the fretless bass. Not only that, but English Settlement drew further still from XTC's well of Englishness, with its cover even depicting a prehistoric Uffington white horse carved into the chalk hills near Swindon. Its lead single, Senses Working Overtime, became their best-selling single in the UK, and English Settlement itself became their best-selling album in their home country. Many people, quite rightly, consider it their magnum opus. Unfortunately, their upwards trajectory was cut short on the subsequent tour, with Andy Partridge suffering a major panic attack on stage in Paris, halfway through Respectable Street no less. You can see footage of the incident on YouTube, and it's quite heartbreaking to see Andy suffering. While it wasn't literally their last gig, it put a permanent stop to XTC as a touring act. Saddled with crippling debts, the band fell out with their manager, who it turned out was completely swindling them, having borrowed large sums of money from Virgin Records against XTC's future earnings, leaving them culpable even after settling with him out of court. Not being able to tour, they were unable to repay those debts, let alone support themselves, and it is estimated within their 20-year contract with Virgin Records, XTC saw 0 publishing royalties. 0. Naturally, with the least material stake in the band, Terry Chambers went the way of Leggy Mountbatten and tragically moved to Australia, after which XTC never again found a permanent drummer. And yet, incredibly, they carried on making music. 1983's pastoral Mama is unfairly maligned in their catalogue, although it did signal the start of XTC's sudden commercial and critical decline. Coincidentally, wink wink, as soon as they could no longer provide a touring cash cow for the record label. I also have a lot of time for 1984's The Big Express, another critical and commercial flop, but nonetheless proof they still had a lot to give creatively as a band. In fact, I distinctly remember bringing this one home and my wife taking one look at the band on the inner sleeve and saying, "These guys are really uncool." And I'm like, well, yeah, that's what makes them cool. Broadly, I think what I've always liked about a lot of the punk and new wave bands is that the movement was born out of a year zero, forget the past approach. Therefore, the music is, for the most part, totally original and the furthest thing from derivative that you can get. And XTC exemplify this to a T, with musicianship of the highest level. So I think it makes it especially interesting that during XTC's period in the doldrums during this time, they decided to form a brand new band that exclusively made derivative music, almost like a release valve for these guys who clearly loved music of all kinds. So not only is that why the 2 albums they released under the pseudonym The Dukes of Stratosphere, 1985's 25 O'Clock and 87's Sonic Sunspot, are so joyous and fun, but also why they are so good. Any fans of Nuggets-era 60s garage rock should check these albums out, as XTC are doing nothing more and nothing less than exactly that style. Interestingly, the first of these 2 records outsold The Big Express by 2-1, even before XTC's involvement was widely known. Then in 1986, they teamed up with Todd Rundgren for the certified masterpiece Skylarking. I find myself saying this a lot lately, but I agonized over covering either Skylarking or Black Sea for this video. And I'm such a fan of it that I've decided not to talk about it here at all, as I would like to leave the door open to discussing it on its own in a video in the future. If you don't know it, all you do need to know is that it's a masterpiece. The relative success of Skylarking restored some energy to the band as they properly entered their late period, defined by ever more clean and clear production, and a natural move away from punk and towards a more progressive experimentalism. I don't like having to brush over them, but 1989's Oranges and Lemons and 1992's None Such are excellent records, but their seemingly unending tussle with Virgin caused them to go on strike in 1993, and finally they were freed of their debt to the record label in 1997. They managed 2 more albums worth of material before personal issues saw XTC fall apart, although not officially or legally. In the years, the bickering band members have mostly remained active musically, but they have more or less avoided each other. In 2017, Colin Moulding teamed up with Terry Chambers for a project called TC&I, the closest we have yet come to an XTC reunion. If you liked this video, please do me a favour and hit the like button, but if you didn't, rather than hit the dislike button, can I suggest you leave a comment and let me know why? I'm always open to feedback, advice and opinions that challenge mine. Plus, it apparently helps me game YouTube's algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it will let you know whenever I put something new up. You can follow me on all the socials if you're so inclined. And if you'd like to incentivize me with a $5 a month to continue doing these videos, a link to my Patreon should be just beneath this video. Cheers.